Nick Reiner was arrested on the evening of December 14, 2025. After news of Rob Reiner's death flooded the headlines and sent shockwaves through the public, the decision to detain his 32-year-old son pushed the tragedy into an entirely different realm, from personal grief to a cold criminal investigation. This was no longer a story of mourning a great talent, but an investigative case centered on a family once seen as a symbol of intellect, artistry, and humanist ideals. Rob Reiner, the director of Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, was found dead alongside his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, in their Brentwood home. Their deaths were confirmed as a homicide. Just hours later, police announced the arrest of Nick Reiner, leaving the public stunned. What then had unfolded within this father-son relationship, and why did years of effort and love end in an irreparable outcome? How does a family of talent, privilege, and genuine goodwill descend into tragedy? From Nick's years struggling with addiction and homelessness, to Rob Reiner's attempts to use cinema as a way to save his son, to the increasingly visible signs of tension leading up to the catastrophe, all of it forms a slow-burning chain of pain. We will trace that relationship, the critical final hours, and the initial allegations released by police to understand why this story is both heartbreaking and impossible to look away from. The decision to arrest Nick Reiner came only after police pieced together what had unfolded in the preceding hours, beginning with the moment the Brentwood home was first opened, in circumstances utterly unprepared for tragedy. Before there was a suspect, before there were charges, there was an emergency call and a discovery from which there was no turning back. On the afternoon of December 14, 2025, Rob Reiner's daughter went to visit her parents at their private residence. What she encountered inside was not the familiar quiet of a famously private household, but two motionless bodies with no signs of life. Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner were found unresponsive, and although emergency medical personnel were dispatched immediately, all efforts to revive them failed. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. From the very first moments, the scene did not align with a natural death. Multiple wounds caused by a sharp object were documented on both victims. This was not a single stab wound or an accidental injury, but bore the hallmarks of deliberate violence. Within a short time, the Los Angeles Police Department officially classified the case as a homicide. The house was immediately sealed off. LAPD's Homicide Division was deployed, combing through every room, every surface, every minute detail. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken doors, no evidence from the security system indicating an outside intrusion. From that point on, the investigation quickly narrowed toward close personal relationships rather than a random attacker. The bodies of Rob Reiner and his wife were transported for autopsy. According to preliminary information from authorities, the cause of death was directly linked to the stab wounds, while the exact time of death continued to be determined through forensic analysis. The home, a place Rob Reiner had long tried to keep shielded from public scrutiny, became the center of a criminal investigation where every detail had the potential to alter the entire case. From the moment his daughter placed the 911 call, this tragedy ceased to be a private family matter. It entered a different phase, colder, more ruthless, where Rob Reiner's death could no longer be separated from questions about those closest to him. As investigators narrowed their focus to intimate relationships, the name Nick Reiner did not emerge as a complete surprise. To those familiar with the family, the tension between Nick and his parents was not new, but a fracture that had stretched across many years, sometimes smoldering quietly, sometimes erupting violently, never fully healed. Nick Reiner grew up in a household where talent and expectation always went hand in hand. Rob Reiner was not only a celebrated director, but a father who believed deeply in responsibility, inner discipline, and the idea that people could ultimately repair themselves. His son, however, entered adulthood along a very different path. Addiction, depression, periods of homelessness, and repeated cycles of recovery that continually collapsed. Each time Nick tried to stand back up, the family hoped. And each time he fell again, the distance between them widened just a little more. Rob and Michelle Singer Reiner never turned their backs on their son. They paid for rehabilitation programs, opened their home when Nick had nowhere else to go, and even chose to bring their family crisis onto the screen. The film, Being Charlie, was born out of what many saw as a desperate attempt, using cinema to speak the words that could not be spoken in real life. But while the film ended, life did not. The core issues remained, unresolved, merely temporarily concealed. According to witness accounts, in the days leading up to the tragedy, the relationship between Nick and his parents was under exceptional strain. That tension did not exist solely in private. On the evening of December 13, 2025, at Conan O'Brien's annual Christmas party, an event typically defined by social cordiality, a heated argument reportedly erupted between Nick and his parents. Those in attendance described the atmosphere turning heavy. Nick was said to display signs of instability, while Rob and Michelle openly expressed concern about their son's condition. The confrontation was reportedly serious enough that Rob Reiner and his wife left the party early, leaving a lasting impression on many witnesses. After that night, disagreements no longer revolved around concern or advice, but reached a point of deadlock, when love no longer knew which way to turn. Rob Reiner was said to be utterly exhausted, caught between the fear of losing his son and the helplessness of being unable to pull him out of the familiar downward spiral. Against that backdrop, the deaths of Rob Reiner and his wife are not merely a homicide requiring clarification. They mark the tragic endpoint of a father-son relationship stretched beyond its limits, where every attempt at rescue had already been made, yet no path could return the family to anything resembling normalcy. And from that long history of tension, the most difficult questions begin to take shape, not only for the police, but for anyone trying to understand what truly led to the night of December 14th. To understand why those tensions persisted and became increasingly difficult to resolve, it is necessary to return to the starting point of Nick Reiner's life. Not the moment he became a name in an investigative file, but his early years, shaped within a family that was both rich in love and heavy with expectation. Nick Reiner was born in 1993 in Los Angeles and grew up at the very center of the American entertainment industry. He was the youngest child of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner, with older siblings, and from an early age lived in an environment where success was a daily presence. For Nick, Hollywood was not a distant dream. It was the familiar backdrop of childhood. Conversations revolving around films, his father's relentless schedule, and a sense of having to grow up faster than other children. But that childhood was not woven from glamour alone. While Rob Reiner embodied discipline, rationality, and a deep belief in human self-correction, Nick early on revealed an inner world that was far more fragile and sensitive than the family had anticipated. His education did not follow a stable trajectory. Emotional volatility, difficulty fitting in, and a sense of alienation appeared at a young age, even if they were not always properly recognized or named. That difference quietly created a misalignment within the family's daily life. In a household where expectations were understood as motivation, Nick experienced them as pressure. Compared to his siblings, he was more vulnerable to comparison, more prone to withdrawal, and struggled to find a sense of belonging within the very environment meant to be the safest. Early attempts at correction, from changing schools to tighter supervision, produced no clear improvement, and at times only widened the emotional distance. It was in those formative years that the seeds of later conflict were planted, not from a lack of love, but from two profoundly different ways of experiencing the world coexisting under one roof. One rooted in structure and control, the other searching for stability within an inner life that had never truly found rest. While Nick was growing up with that persistent sense of being out of sync, Rob Reiner's life followed an entirely different trajectory, clear, forceful, and steadily expanding. Over time, that contrast became a quiet but inseparable backdrop to everything that unfolded within the family. Rob Reiner entered the center of American cultural life in the early 1970s, not cautiously, but through a role that forced him to confront conflict head-on from the very beginning. Michael "Meathead" Stivic in All in the Family was not merely a comic character. He was a thorn in the side of conservative America, a dissenting voice broadcast nightly during prime time. The role earned Reiner 2 Emmy Awards, but at the cost of sustained psychological pressure. Every episode was an ideological battle, every season a new round of controversy. It was in that environment that Reiner learned how to endure conflict, stand firm under criticism, and defend his convictions, skills that later became the foundation of his directing career. When he transitioned to directing with This Is Spinal Tap, Reiner chose a path very few were willing to take. The mockumentary confused distributors. It was neither straightforward comedy nor conventional drama, and it was difficult to market. Initial box office returns were modest, reactions mixed, and pressure to edit the film into something more accessible was constant. Reiner refused. He protected the pseudo-documentary structure, accepting the risk of being misunderstood. Success came slowly, but when the film became a cult classic, its influence extended far beyond ticket sales, opening the door for an entire genre of mockumentary filmmaking and cementing a professional philosophy. Not everything that sells quickly endures. That creative momentum continued as Reiner moved between seemingly opposing genres. The Sure Thing demonstrated his grasp of romantic comedy's emotional rhythm, but Stand By Me marked the true turning point. The film refused to romanticize childhood or shy away from loneliness and loss, exceeded its modest budget expectations, and earned critical acclaim. Behind the scenes, Reiner repeatedly resisted pressure to soften the film's emotional core for broader appeal. That resistance made production tense, but it also allowed Stand By Me to become one of the most emotionally enduring works in American cinema. With The Princess Bride, Reiner faced another challenge, creating a fairy tale for adults without betraying the audience's intelligence. Initial box office performance was only moderate, leading some to label the project too strange. Reiner defended its smart tone and gentle irony, refusing to simplify its characters or themes. Over time, through television, home video, and re-releases, the film quietly accumulated cultural value, becoming a long-term asset and proving that a film's longevity does not depend solely on its opening weekend. The late 1980s and early 1990s marked Reiner's peak in both influence and pressure, when Harry Met Sally was not only a commercial success, but redefined modern romantic comedy through extended philosophical dialogue and an uncompromising ending, earning an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay. Production notes describe intense debates over pacing and the ending, yet Reiner consistently chose depth over safety. Misery followed success in the opposite direction. Stripped down, claustrophobic, and psychologically driven, earning Kathy Bates an Academy Award. Then, A Few Good Men became a box office hit and received multiple Oscar nominations, renowned for its confrontational courtroom exchanges. the result of Reiner's insistence on preserving legal drama rhythms despite pressure to accelerate the film with more overt action. That career, however, was not a straight upward line. In the mid-1990s, North was met with harsh critical backlash, becoming a rare but painful misstep that forced Reiner to confront the limits of his creative instincts. The American president quickly restored his standing with strong box office performance, demonstrating his continued ability to balance romance and politics. Yet the market was shifting, and Reiner increasingly had to be selective with projects as pressure to repeat past peaks intensified. From the late 1990s into the early 2000s, as Hollywood pivoted toward franchises and spectacle, Reiner remained committed to a personal voice. The Story of Us and subsequent projects delivered uneven commercial results and were sometimes criticized as too dialogue-heavy. That same persistence, however, preserved his identity as an auteur, even as box office dominance waned and investor skepticism grew. Entering the 2010s, Reiner deliberately scaled down, prioritizing character and emotional risk over commercial reach. The magic of Belle Isle and Being Charlie sparked debate for their direct, unsparing approach and lack of concession to prevailing tastes. This was a period in which Reiner accepted diminished revenue and reduced media attention in exchange for telling stories he believed needed to be told. Behind that choice was not comfort, but a form of professional solitude, the familiar price paid by filmmakers who commit fully to their creative convictions. Throughout Nick Reiner's brief and precarious professional path, Rob Reiner was not a father who set out to build a Hollywood career for his son. Yet he was the figure who left the deepest imprint, in a way that was complicated, deeply loving, and profoundly risky. Rob Reiner understood the dark side of fame better than most. He did not turn Nick into the famous director's son who appeared regularly in commercial projects, nor did he clear a safe path for him to stand beneath the shelter of paternal power. For many years, Nick had no stable career, no sustained run of roles, no clear signs of being shaped into a professional presence in the industry. This was not neglect, but restraint, an effort to avoid placing additional pressure on a son who was already fragile. Only when Nick entered his most severe crisis did Rob make what would become his most direct and most controversial intervention, the film Being Charlie, 2015. This was not a conventional debut project. Nick co-wrote the screenplay, drawing heavily from his own lived experiences: addiction, depression, drifting, periods of homelessness. Rob Reiner stepped behind the camera as director, turning cinema into the last tool he believed he had left to keep his son tethered to life. Being Charlie, therefore, was more than a film. It was a form of therapy made public, a moment in which a father used his craft to give his son a voice, a structure, a narrative with a beginning and an end, in the hope that seeing himself on screen might spark an awakening that real life had failed to produce. But that choice also placed Nick in a perilous position. His wounded inner life was exposed to public scrutiny. The boundary between father and director nearly dissolved, and every negative reaction to the film could easily be interpreted as a personal failure. The film did not generate a professional breakthrough. Critical response was divided, box office performance unremarkable, and debate followed over whether the story was too intimate, too close to real life. For Nick, Being Charlie did not open a new door. It closed the illusion that cinema could substitute for inner stability. For Rob, it forced him to confront the most painful limit of all. Not everything can be saved by art. After Being Charlie, Rob Reiner did not continue creating projects for Nick. He did not attempt to reposition his son within the industry or use his influence to push him further. That withdrawal was not a professional failure, but a bitter acknowledgement that a career cannot repair the deepest fractures within a person. Rob's role in Nick's professional life thus lies not in success or fame, but in a love-driven gamble, a final, risky attempt that did not deliver the outcome he had hoped for. Nick Reiner's descent did not begin with a dramatic collapse. It unfolded slowly, persistently, and cyclically, like a spiral in which each apparent bottom revealed another depth below. Emotional instability surfaced early, but it was only in adulthood that it fused with addiction into a force strong enough to dismantle every structure Nick tried to build. Nick has acknowledged substance addiction across multiple periods of his life. Not a single fall, but a pattern of rehab, relapse, disappearance, and return, repeated over many years. Each attempt at sobriety revived hope within the family. Each relapse eroded another layer of trust. Nick's sober periods were never long enough to become a foundation, yet never short enough to be dismissed as hopeless. As stability collapsed, Nick began to drift. He has spoken of periods without housing, sleeping on the streets across different states, surviving on temporary jobs, and the sporadic kindness of strangers. This was not the romanticized life of a rebel, but an existence stripped of belonging. No family of his own, no stable career, no schedule or long-term goal, Nick moved from one day to the next in a life without anchor. Throughout all of this, Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner did not abandon their son. They paid for repeated rehabilitation programs, opened their home whenever Nick had nowhere else to go, and continued to believe, even as that belief grew increasingly exhausted. But their constant presence could not replace what Nick lacked most: the ability to keep himself rooted in a stable life. Love was present, but it was not enough to produce lasting recovery. Nick's emotional instability has never been publicly framed as a specific medical diagnosis, but it manifested clearly in behavior. Difficulty maintaining personal discipline, a tendency toward isolation, and a repeated pattern of self-sabotaging whatever he had just begun to rebuild. Addiction was not merely the cause, it was the consequence of an inner life that never found equilibrium. And each time Nick returned home, his relationship with his parents became both closer and more strained. A space where family was the final refuge, but also the clearest mirror of unresolved failure. Being Charlie emerged from this context as a last-ditch attempt at rescue. Nick helped write the script, recounting his years of addiction and drifting. Rob stood behind the camera, trying to turn chaos into a coherent story. But when the film ended, real life continued. Exposing pain to the public did not bring the stability they had hoped for. Instead, it forced Nick to confront himself through the eyes of others, at a time when the inner strength to stand firm had yet to form. After that, the old cycle did not disappear. Efforts at recovery continued, but without a definitive turning point. Nick did not build a family of his own, nor sustain an independent life for long. Every path eventually led back to his parents' home, a place where love remained. But exhaustion had also taken hold. In that picture, Nick's addiction is not a scandal to be displayed, but a prolonged battle without a clear victor. There is no moment of complete rebirth, no decisive rise. Only a man continually struggling to survive himself, and a family standing nearby, powerless as each cycle returns. It is precisely from that cycle of addiction, instability, and exhausted returns that the tragedy entered a phase no one could reverse. When Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner were confirmed to have been murdered, and Nick Reiner was arrested as a suspect, everything that had once been viewed as a private family struggle was abruptly dragged into the open. No longer a story of healing, but a cold criminal case. In the first hours and days after the tragedy, the Reiner family issued almost no personal statements. There was no public defense of Nick, nor any attempt to soften public reaction. The few confirmations that emerged focused solely on cooperation with investigators and requests for privacy. That silence carried a distinct tone, less a legal strategy than the posture of a family that had exhausted its capacity to say anything more after years of failed dialogue. The media, by contrast, allowed no pause. The death of Rob Reiner, a man associated with stories of dialogue, humanism, and moral responsibility, was already shocking. But the arrest of his son was the detail that pushed public reaction into disarray. News coverage continuously assembled known fragments: Nick's history of addiction, his parents' prolonged efforts at rescue, the heated argument at the December 13th party, and the gap in time leading into the night of December 14th. The story was no longer told with narrative grace, but through the logic of forensic reconstruction. Once the deaths of Rob Reiner and his wife were confirmed, a wave of reaction swept through Hollywood and the public, revealing for the first time how the film community confronts an emotional paradox of overwhelming scale. Across media platforms, many close colleagues spoke openly about Rob Reiner, yet almost none mentioned Nick's arrest or the legal suspicions surrounding him, as if observing an unspoken rule to respect both the deceased and the integrity of the investigation. The response from the American film community was not loud, but heavy in a different way. An outpouring of tributes to Rob and an absolute silence around the name Nick Reiner. On social media, in television interviews, and in brief press statements, Reiner's peers appeared to converge on the same position: honoring the legacy, avoiding the case. Jerry O'Connell, an actor in Stand By Me, was among the few to speak directly on camera. On CBS Mornings, he said, "Rob was like a father to me. It's just surreal." Speaking to People, O'Connell acknowledged that the loss transcended professional grief. "I just feel like a parent has passed." His words made no reference to the investigation or the violence, preserving Rob Reiner solely in the role he wished to remember, a spiritual father. Other tributes followed the same pattern of restraint. Director Ron Howard wrote that Reiner was a superlative filmmaker, a supportive colleague, and at all times a dedicated citizen, offering condolences to the family while avoiding any legal detail. Ben Stiller called the loss a huge one, describing Reiner as a kind, caring person who was really, really funny. Elijah Wood wrote simply, "So much love to their kids and family." All of these statements stopped at Rob, as if going any further would cross a boundary no one dared to approach. Political figures close to Reiner adopted the same approach. Former President Barack Obama posted, "Michelle and I are heartbroken by the tragic passing of Rob Reiner and his beloved wife, Michelle." Beneath all of the stories he produced was a deep belief in the goodness of people. California Governor Gavin Newsom called Reiner the big-hearted genius behind so many of the classic stories we love, and praised his extraordinary contribution to humanity. None of these public statements mentioned Nick Reiner's arrest, a deliberate silence that was impossible to miss. The controversial exception came from outside Hollywood. Donald Trump posted a message on Truth Social attacking Rob Reiner's political views, quickly drawing widespread backlash for its perceived lack of respect during a moment of mourning. That reaction only underscored the contrast. While filmmakers maintained an ethical silence, peripheral commentary reopened wounds in the public sphere. Fans reacted more viscerally. Across forums and social media, the recurring questions were not accusatory but searching. How could a family that seemed to do everything right, money, treatment, love, patience, still end this way? Many revisited Being Charlie, no longer as a film, but as a warning that had gone unheeded. At present, the story remains unresolved, yet viewed across the full arc, from early instability and prolonged addiction through attempts at rescue via cinema, to the arrest following death. The tragedy does not appear as a sudden collapse, but as the final fracture in a process that had been breaking for a long time. And it is there that the most haunting question emerges, beyond suspects or verdicts. Love, in the end, was not enough to keep a family together. If there is one thing that makes Rob Reiner's death especially painful, it is not only the way he died, but everything that was never said afterward. There was no final farewell, no last message, no sign that a man who spent his entire life telling stories ever had the chance to close the story of his own. The Brentwood house, a place Rob Reiner had tried to keep shielded from public pressure, is now nothing more than a crime scene. What happened inside has been sealed off by legal procedures, investigative reports, and the silence of those left behind. The deaths of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner have been confirmed as a homicide, yet the deeper meaning of that tragedy remains beyond the reach of any official conclusion. Nick Reiner has been arrested. A case file has been opened. Theories are being constructed. But amid all those details, there is a void that cannot be filled. The void of a father-son relationship stretched for too long, where love, responsibility, fear, and helplessness piled up until there was no way out. Rob Reiner believed that people could save one another through dialogue. Yet his private life ended at the point where dialogue no longer had the power to save anyone. Hollywood mourns Rob Reiner as a humanistic filmmaker. The public remembers him through films that taught them to believe in friendship, love, and moral conscience. But behind those tributes lies an uncomfortable truth. Cinema can rewrite almost anything, except the deepest fractures within a family. There is no script perfect enough to repair a life that has been breaking for too long. One day, the law may close this case with a clear verdict. But even if that happens, there will still be questions that are never answered. What was Rob Reiner thinking in his final days? Did he believe he still had enough time to save his son? Or had he already come to recognize the most painful limit of all, that not every love can win? Rob Reiner leaves behind a great cinematic legacy, but he also leaves behind a story without a complete ending. The story of a father, a family, and the harsh cost of believing that human beings can always be saved by goodwill. And perhaps the most haunting question is not who was right or wrong, but something far more difficult. If even the most humanistic storytellers cannot write an ending for their own families, what can we still believe in? And how far should that belief go? What do you think about the tragedy of Rob Reiner and Nick Reiner? Is this simply a chain of wrong choices compounding over time, or a bitter reminder that there are fractures no amount of love can ever heal? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next shocking Hollywood stories we'll continue to explore.